30 years ago, the United States Senate began an experiment. And you, the American people, were the subjects. 30 years ago, the Senate began televising its debates. And they did this with good intentions. They thought this would improve rhetoric in Washington. They thought this would increase the productivity of Congress. And they even thought, if only we put ourselves on TV more, this will improve our approval ratings. History has shown us, on each of these accounts, and on many more, this experiment has had the opposite effects. I'll never forget the day when I witnessed this experiment for the first time. 2 years ago, I was 19 years old, and I attended my first congressional hearing. And I remember, just like it was yesterday, walking in to this beautifully ornate room and sitting down in this hearing room, being surrounded by all these powerful people, lobbyists, senators, members of the media. I remember feeling like a very small fish in a very big sea. But as the hearing got underway, I was shocked. And I remember thinking to myself, why are they talking like this? Why are they acting the way that they are? This is ridiculous. Because senators would come into the room, oftentimes only when it was their turn to speak, and they would sit down in front of the microphone, and they would rattle off this trite little partisan comment, or they would give this little sensational soundbite that would make a phenomenal headline. And so I kept thinking, why are they talking like this? They sound like they are still campaigning. And so in the midst of this bewilderment, I had an epiphany moment of sorts. I was looking around the room, and I noticed on the walls there were these cameras. And I noticed how the camera would pan the room, and then how it would zoom in on whoever was speaking at the time. And that's when I realized, oh, they're not talking to each other because they're talking to the rest of the world. They're talking to constituents thousands of miles away. They're talking to the interest groups who right now are scoring their allegiance, the same interest groups that will finance their next campaign. And so that day, 2 years ago, I became obsessed with this question of what have been the effects of televising the Senate. And the first thing that I thought is, why does it even matter? I mean, really, who watches C-SPAN, right? And this may be the most shocking thing I share with you all day. Each week, an average of 45 million Americans watch C-SPAN, which the only thing that really tells me is that 45 million Americans suffer from severe insomnia. We all agree that Washington is broken. We all agree that we have a political class that doesn't represent the interests of average Americans. But we seem to disagree about the ways of fixing this. One of the greatest flaws with conventional solutions is that it seems to ignore a fundamental reality of human nature, a fundamental reality that should shape the way we think about reforming our government. And that reality is this: human beings, politicians in particular, are not necessarily good or bad, but what we all are is self-interested. And so the great challenge that we are still facing today is, how do we create a political system that motivates and incentivizes and encourages and pushes and constrains self-interested politicians to act in ways that advance the common good? Because we know that politicians are going to do what's in their best self-interest. The question is, how do we get them to do what's in our best interest? A few years ago, CNN posted a YouTube video of a Senate floor debate. And the debate was between a senior Republican senator and a senior Democratic senator. And these two guys had a rigorous back and forth. I mean, they had a phenomenal conversation. Their conversation was so good that it was almost productive. And here's how CNN described that interaction with the headline, "Shocker, a real Senate debate." This is how far we've come, where an honest conversation anywhere near TV cameras is shocking. The most liked comment on that YouTube video is pretty telling. I think it shares the sentiment that many of us have. And someone commented, and I quote, "Politics, my favorite reality show." When I was presenting this idea to a gentleman who had worked in the Senate and the House for about 25 years, and I said, "We should stop televising the Senate." Without missing a beat, he looked at me and he said, "Bringing cameras into the Senate created the Real Housewives of Congress." I was like, oh. The question now is, how do we move forward? This issue is so much bigger than the United States Senate. It's bigger than cameras in the Senate, bigger than our government, because it gets to the heart of how we as human beings communicate with one another, how we come together and try to solve problems with our words. And there's a name for this process, something that we all do every day. And that process is called deliberation. And first and foremost, deliberation tries to answer this question. It tries to answer the question, what should be? What should we do to improve our communities? What should we do to advance our circumstance? What need we do right now? And following this question is the question, what's possible? What can actually be done? The Senate used to be called the greatest deliberative body in the world, but now we use that term pretty tongue-in-cheek. Over the last few years, as I've examined this issue, I looked to theories of discourse, to minds much more brilliant than mine. I looked to Aristotle and Cicero, to James Madison and Ben Franklin. And what I found is that there are three requirements, three elements, three fundamental tenets that must exist in order for deliberation to work. And what we see is that real, productive deliberation doesn't happen on national television. The first element of a deliberative body is a marketplace of ideas. This is the principle that you can hash things out with one another, that you can think out loud, that you can present good ideas and bad ideas. Because oftentimes we figure out what should be by first figuring out what shouldn't be. But today, the deliberative process in Congress is censored. The Senate may be the only place that rivals kindergarten classrooms for telling the most stories in a given day. But this is how ideas are presented. It's a bipartisan problem. A Republican and a Democrat come to the floor, and they deliver this impassioned story, this constituent story, very emotional. And then they talk right past each other. And the reason they talk past each other is because they're not talking to each other. And the second element for a deliberative body is openness to change. George Bernard Shaw said this best. He said, "Progress is impossible without change. And those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." Today, it's kind of crazy, really. Senators can't change their mind. The men and women tasked with creating laws that affect our everyday lives can't admit that a better argument is better. But we don't, I think this gets to the root of how we misunderstand what accountability really means. We seem to think that accountability means that our elected officials adamantly and relentlessly and uncompromisingly defend the words that they previously said. But that's not accountable. That's arrogant. We shouldn't elect people because we believe they will always be right. We should elect people because we believe they will always do what's right. And sometimes doing what's right means admitting you were wrong. And the final and third element and requirement for deliberation is comity. Usually when we think of the Senate, we think of comedy as in, haha, it's kind of sad, but this is very different. This is comity with a T. And this is the idea that you can disagree with someone without being disagreeable. That you can have a sincerely held belief that that person is wrong, yet speak to them respectfully and treat them with decency. If we want our legislators to start acting like people, we need to give them an environment where they start seeing each other as people. We need to humanize the legislative process, not dehumanize it, because technology is wonderful. It is. But no technology will ever exist that can replace the value of a face-to-face human interaction. Because today, instead of representative government, we're being fed this facade of transparency. One of my greatest fears when I was thinking about this issue is, well, if we stop televising the Senate, will we still know what they're doing? The answer to that is absolutely and unequivocally yes. Because we're going to know what they're really doing. We're going to get authenticity instead of political posturing. Just to name two reasons to support that. As it's been the case for the last 220 years of the Senate's history, the Senate will remain open to the public. An immediate oversight, but also the debates and the transcripts of those debates will be released the next day. Now, we don't like this as much, right? Because we might have to read the damn thing. We might have to look at the fullness of an argument and not just a headline. We might have to trade sound bites for substance and pandering for honest conversations. Very rarely in the Senate over the last 30 years has the Senate ever deliberated off camera. They've done this very rarely. But they did this in the 1990s during the Clinton impeachment trials. And obviously the impeachment of a president is incredibly serious. And it's also very easy to politicize for Republicans and Democrats. But such an important issue, they said, okay, for the first time in a while, we're going to go to a place that's called the Old Senate Chamber. And the Old Senate Chamber is exactly like it sounds. It's the Old Senate Chamber. And that's where they went. And they deliberated this issue. And I'm struck by the words of a senior staff member who was there at the time. In reflecting on his experience, he said that those debates were the first time in his career where the center aisle seemed to disappear. There were no Republicans and Democrats. There weren't opponents and enemies. There were colleagues and friends. There were United States senators. By coming and talking about this issue today, I've accepted the fact that I might piss some people off, that I might make some very powerful and very wealthy people very angry. But I'm okay with that. Because I didn't come here today to launch a political campaign. I didn't come here today to ask for your vote. I came here to ask for your help. This is so much bigger than one citizen. The greatest part of this idea is that it's possible. In order to stop televising the Senate, it doesn't take a law. It doesn't take the House and the Senate to pass something and agree on something, which doesn't happen too often. It doesn't take the signature of the president. It doesn't take a constitutional amendment or even a Supreme Court decision. In order to stop televising the Senate, it simply takes 51 out of 100 senators. A simple majority vote. This is a procedural rule. This is not the law. If you believe that this will reduce some of the partisanship, if you believe this will increase some of the productivity, if you believe this will enhance the quality of conversations in Washington, D.C., I ask that you call your two senators and tell them that. Both of these phone calls should take about 60 to 90 seconds, depending on how confused the staffer is who answers the phone. You want me to tell them what exactly? Einstein said it best when he defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Time has shown us that this experiment has failed us. If we, the people, do our part, we will end the insanity, and the United States Senate will reclaim its title as the greatest deliberative body in the world. Thank you.